I have to tell you what happened 3 nights ago, because keeping it inside any longer feels impossible. That night, God answered a question I never thought I'd be brave enough to ask. A question about the words that wound his heart the most. And when he responded, what he showed me overturned everything I thought I understood about his nature. I've been sitting with it ever since, torn between heartbreak and hope. Right now, as I speak to you, I'm sitting on my balcony. The horizon is painted in soft golds and silvers, and the morning sun filters through the trees. The air smells like rain that hasn't fallen yet, and somewhere in the distance, birds are singing. It should be peaceful, but the weight of what God revealed presses heavily on my chest. It's strange how creation can glow with beauty, while the truth inside you feels almost unbearable. To understand why this conversation with God happened, I need to go back a few months. I've been wrestling with something, not just as an actor who has portrayed Jesus for years, but as a man who is still trying, every day, to follow him honestly. Playing Jesus in The Chosen has given me a front row seat to how people speak to and about God. I've read thousands of messages, each one a window into the way believers talk to their Father. And over time, a pattern began to emerge, one that disturbed me deeply. Again and again, I saw the same sentences. I know I'm probably bothering God. I'm not worthy of His attention. I don't deserve His love. These weren't isolated comments. They formed a chorus of self-condemnation. People apologized for existing, belittled themselves, and spoke as though God barely tolerated them. I'd read these words late at night after filming, and a question started echoing in my heart. If this breaks me to hear, how must it break Him? That question haunted me through long filming days. I remember one week especially, scenes of Jesus healing the broken, showing tenderness to the outcast. Between takes, surrounded by lights and cameras, I couldn't stop thinking about the difference between what we were portraying on screen and what I kept hearing from believers off screen. It was as if we'd been given the most radiant story of divine love, yet we could only speak about ourselves with shame and apology. Then came a message I can't forget. Someone wrote, "I'm just a nobody who keeps messing up. I know I don't deserve God's love, but maybe you could pray for me anyway." I stared at that line for a long time. Something inside me broke open. If reading it hurt me this much, what must it sound like to the one who gave everything for us? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, wondering how many millions of people were whispering those same words into the dark. Words soaked in self-hatred and guilt. And how many times heaven must have wept hearing them. And in that silence, I realized I was guilty too. I had been speaking to God with the same wounded vocabulary. Every time I began a prayer with, "I'm sorry for bothering you," or "I know I don't deserve this," I was treating Him like a tired king, tolerating interruptions instead of a father eager for his child's voice. The realization settled into me like a weight I couldn't shake. During production days, it followed me from the makeup chair to the set. During nights, it sat beside me in the dark. I began to feel a desperate need to know the truth. What words truly sadden God's heart? What phrases reach His ears like quiet heartbreak? I was terrified to ask. I thought the answer would be predictable. Maybe curses, blasphemies, hateful speech, the kind of obvious rebellion we all recognize. I braced myself for a lecture on profanity or gossip. But something in me knew this wasn't about outer language. It was about something deeper, the words born from misunderstanding His love. 3 nights ago, I finally asked. I had just finished filming one of the most emotional scenes of the season. Exhausted, my voice raw from crying on set, I returned to my trailer. The world outside was dark and still, Yet I could feel something stirring inside me, an ache, a pull, to ask the question once and for all. When I got home, I fell to my knees beside my bed. My hands were trembling as I whispered, God, what words from your children upset you the most? What do we say that grieves your heart? The air shifted immediately. It's difficult to describe, like the atmosphere itself became aware. Everything grew still, heavy, alive. My pulse thundered in my ears. I thought perhaps he wouldn't answer, or that I'd imagined the entire thing. But then, the room changed. It felt as though I was somewhere else entirely. Suddenly, I was standing in a vast garden. The air shimmered with color, and every leaf, every ray of light seemed to hum with life. The world itself was breathing, and there he was, Jesus. Not as I've ever acted him, not as an image from a painting, but as reality itself. His eyes met mine, filled with love so deep it felt like light pouring straight through me. And yet, behind that love was sorrow. I couldn't hold back the tears. Jonathan, he said softly, his voice carrying both compassion and weight. You asked about the words that upset me most. Are you prepared for an answer that will surprise you? I nodded. My body felt weightless, my spirit trembling. He began to walk through the garden, and I followed. The flowers turned their heads toward him as we passed, as if even creation wanted to hear what he was about to say. The words that grieve me most, he said, aren't the curses of rebellion. Those I understand. They come from pain, from ignorance. The words that wound me most come from my own children. He stopped and turned toward me. His eyes glistened. When they speak against themselves, when they call themselves worthless, unlovable, unredeemable, they are denying the very love I died to prove. The world around us blurred. I could feel my heart splintering under the truth of his words. He continued, every time one of my children says, I'm a nobody, they're saying my sacrifice was meaningless. When they say, I don't matter, they're rejecting the truth that I counted them worth my blood. I couldn't speak. All I could see in his expression was the grief of a father hearing his beloved children curse their own existence. Imagine, he said quietly, watching your own children apologize for being alive, telling you again and again that they're failures, that they don't deserve your love. That's what I hear every day. The air trembled with sorrow. I fell to my knees again, unable to meet his gaze. And then he said the sentence that has stayed with me ever since. The words that upset me most aren't spoken in hatred, Jonathan. They're spoken in ignorance of my love. He gestured for me to stand, and when I did, I realized the entire garden was alive with a radiant stillness, like heaven itself was listening. My children have forgotten who they are, he said. That is what breaks my heart. I stood there weeping, realizing that the way we speak about ourselves is not harmless. It is a reflection of whether or not we believe in his love. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. Are you ready to hear the kinds of words that wound me most deeply? I could only whisper, yes. He smiled gently. Not a smile of joy, but one of compassion for what was about to come. Then listen carefully, he said, because once you hear them, you'll never be able to unhear them again. And in that sacred silence, the lesson began. Jesus sat beside the glimmering stream, the water catching light like liquid glass. His presence filled the garden with both warmth and sorrow. When he spoke again, his voice carried a resonance that seemed to echo from eternity itself. The words that grieve me most, he said, are not what people expect. They are not curses born of rage, nor blasphemies shouted in rebellion. I understand those words, for they come from wounds, from confusion, from pain. But the ones that truly wound my heart come from a deeper place, from my own children who have forgotten who they are. He turned toward me, and the expression on his face was something I'll never forget. Not anger, but a heartbreak so profound it silenced the entire garden. When they call themselves worthless, he said softly, they're denying the worth I placed within them. When they whisper that they are unlovable, they are rejecting the very reason I gave my life. When they say they don't matter, they are contradicting the truth of the cross. His words cut through the air like lightning, not destructive, but illuminating everything in their path. I could feel the garden responding. Even the light dimmed slightly, as though creation itself grieved with him. I didn't die for worthless people, he said firmly, his eyes now glistening with tears that shimmered like molten gold. I died because every soul mattered. Each life was worth the price of my own. I stood there trembling. Every time I had heard believers talk about themselves with disgust, every message filled with phrases like, I'm a failure, or I don't deserve his love. I realized I had been listening to words that pierced heaven's heart. He walked a few steps away, his robe brushing against the grass that seemed to glow under his feet. When my children speak of themselves with shame, when they keep apologizing for needing me, it is as if they believe their presence is an inconvenience. But I delight in them. I long for their voices. I wait for their prayers like a father waits to hear his child laugh. The air vibrated gently, as though the truth itself was alive. He gestured toward the shining stream beside us. You see how the water sings? It never apologizes for flowing. It was created to reflect light, just as my children were created to reflect my love. Yet, they approach me as if they are intruders in my own garden. His voice softened, almost breaking. When they say, I'm sorry for bothering you, they imagine me weary of them. When they whisper, I don't deserve this, they accuse my grace of being conditional. Those words wound me deeply because they twist the truth of who I am. He paused, gazing at the horizon where light and shadow met. I am not burdened by their presence, he said. I am overjoyed by it. For a moment, everything around us stilled. I could hear only the rhythm of the stream and the faint sound of my own breath. Then his tone grew more solemn. There is another kind of word that breaks my heart, he continued. When my children speak hatred over themselves, when they call themselves failures, ugly, broken, beyond repair, they are attacking my own handiwork. Every insult they throw at themselves is an insult to the Creator who shaped them. He placed his hand over his heart as though feeling each wound again. They do not realize that when they say, I'm useless, they are striking at the image of God within them. They are wounding me through the reflection I made in their own souls. A quiet wind swept through the garden, carrying his words through the trees. The leaves whispered like a choir of lament. I couldn't hold back my tears. I thought of every person who had ever whispered such cruel things about themselves in the mirror. Every prayer beginning with apology instead of gratitude. I thought of my own words. How many times I had told God I wasn't enough. Jesus continued walking slowly, and I followed close behind. His shoulders were heavy with compassion. When they compare themselves to others, he said, they're telling me I made mistakes, that I should have painted their lives with someone else's colors, but each one was crafted intentionally. Each one is a masterpiece. He stopped and looked at me. Imagine a painting complaining to its artist, saying it should have been different, darker, brighter, less noticeable. That's what happens when my children look at someone else and call themselves inadequate. They forget that every brushstroke of their being was chosen with purpose. I felt my heart breaking open in a way I had never experienced. The more he spoke, the clearer it became that this was not about mere language. It was about relationship, about how we reflect what we believe about his love through the words we speak about ourselves. Then his tone shifted, becoming filled with a kind of divine fire. When my children speak hopelessness, he said, when they sigh and say, nothing will ever change, they are calling me a liar. When they say God has given up on me, they are denying the truth that I am the God of redemption. The air brightened again, trembling with energy. I am the God of new beginnings, he declared. I am the God who rebuilds ruins, who breathes life into dust. When they speak despair, they close the door I am trying to open for them. He lifted his hands, and the garden seemed to pulse with light. I want them to speak hope, not because optimism pleases me, but because truth does. When they declare that I am faithful, they invite heaven to move on their behalf. I watched as the sky above the garden deepened into hues of rose and amber, as if the world itself was leaning in to listen. Then he looked directly into my eyes again. His voice dropped to a whisper that still carried more power than thunder. And when they say, I can't be forgiven, or my sin is too great, they are denying the cross itself. They are saying that my blood was not enough, that my sacrifice was incomplete. Jonathan, those words tear through my heart more than any insult ever spoken against me. Tears streamed freely down his face, shining brighter than the light around us. They believe their shame is stronger than my grace. They think their failure outweighs my mercy. But I am limitless. My love has no boundaries. I couldn't breathe. Every revelation felt like the air had been replaced by light. I finally understood that the words which break heaven's heart aren't the ones filled with anger. They're the quiet, self-inflicted wounds we speak over our own souls. He placed a hand on my shoulder again, steadying me. Now you see, he said gently, these are the 7 kinds of words that sadden me. The words of self-worthlessness, of shame, of hatred toward oneself, of comparison, of despair, of fear, and of unbelief in my sacrifice. Each one tells me that my children have forgotten who they are. I could barely whisper, Lord, what do you want me to do with this? He smiled, even through his tears. Tell them, but not to burden them with guilt. Tell them so they can be free. He lifted his gaze toward the glowing horizon. When they understand what hurts me, they will learn what brings me joy. The light around us brightened again, casting gold across the river of glass. Now, he said, let me show you the kind of words that make heaven sing. The light of the garden had changed. What moments ago had been golden and gentle was now glowing with the soft radiance of dawn breaking through mist. Jesus stood near the stream, his reflection rippling across the water like living fire. There was no sound but the pulse of creation, the rhythm of heaven itself. He turned toward me, and when he smiled, it was the kind of smile that carried the weight of eternity and the tenderness of a father who would give anything for his children to understand his heart. Now, he said, let me show you what brings me joy. Those words fell over me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The atmosphere shifted. What had been heavy with sorrow was now filled with warmth, as though heaven itself was leaning closer to listen. When my children speak truth about who they are, he said, the whole of creation rejoices. Every time they declare, I am loved, they echo the song of heaven. Every time they say, I am chosen, They align themselves with my purpose. And when they whisper, I am worthy because Jesus made me worthy, they honor my sacrifice. I watched as his joy seemed to awaken the garden. Flowers lifted their faces toward the light, and the stream shimmered brighter than before. The very air pulsed with life, as though each word of truth stirred the heartbeat of the universe. These words, Jesus said, are not mere sentences. They are reminders of identity. They release heaven's melody back into a world that has forgotten its tune. He lifted his hands toward the sky. When my children say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, they're not boasting, they're remembering. When they declare, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, they're not being proud, they're agreeing with my craftsmanship. These words make my heart sing. He walked toward me again, his expression filled with passion and delight. Gratitude, he said, is one of the purest sounds heaven hears. When my children replace apology with thankfulness, sorrow with celebration, fear with faith, I see chains fall off their souls. He knelt beside the stream, touching the surface lightly. The water responded as though alive, swirling into patterns of light and color. When they say, thank you for wanting to spend time with me, instead of sorry for bothering you, they are seeing me rightly. When they say, I'm grateful for your love, instead of I don't deserve your love, they're receiving what I gave freely, without shame. As he spoke, it struck me. These weren't commandments. They were invitations. God wasn't demanding perfection in speech. He was revealing the language of truth that sets his people free. Then his voice softened again. Words of hope, he said, move mountains in my heart. When my children speak them, even in darkness, heaven lights up. When they say, God is working everything for my good, they are declaring trust in who I am. When they whisper, my future is secure in Christ, they are proclaiming faith, even when they can't see the outcome. The garden seemed to hum with harmony, the air shimmering as though angels were listening. Faith, he said, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to speak life in the middle of uncertainty. When they say, I can handle whatever comes because Christ is with me, they're acknowledging my presence. When they declare, God will provide, they are opening the door for miracles. He rose to his feet again, and I felt the ground beneath me pulse with energy, alive with the echo of his words. Do you see? He said. When they speak this way, they are speaking my heart back to me. They are calling heaven into earth. They are remembering who they are and who I am. The joy in his eyes was overwhelming. It wasn't distant or ethereal. It was the kind of joy that wept with gratitude, that felt every word spoken in faith as an act of love returned. He continued, when they say, I am God's beloved child, they are not describing a hope. They are naming a fact. When they say, I am redeemed and restored, they are celebrating what has already been finished. He looked at me and smiled. These are the words that make heaven sing. The garden began to transform again. The colors deepened, the light expanded, and every sound, the whispering leaves, the flowing water, even the distant songs of unseen creatures, seemed to join in one grand chorus of joy. In that moment, I realized something life-changing. God's joy wasn't abstract. It was deeply personal. Each time one of his children dared to speak the truth about themselves, to say, I am loved, I am chosen, I am forgiven. Heaven didn't just applaud, it celebrated as though a lost melody had been found. Jesus turned to me and said, Jonathan, this is why your work matters. When people see my heart through your portrayal, when they hear the tone of my voice and see my compassion, They begin to believe that such love could be for them too. That is the beginning of healing. He stepped closer, his voice gentle but filled with authority. You are not just telling stories. You are showing them mine. When they see me delight in the broken, they learn to stop despising their own scars. When they watch me embrace the outcast, they realize I've been reaching for them all along. I swallowed hard, barely able to speak. But Lord, I whispered, how can I ever portray that kind of love fully? He smiled, touching his hand to his heart. You don't need to act it. You only need to carry it. The world will see me when they see you live it. Tears filled my eyes again. I felt so small, so unworthy of what I was hearing, yet somehow more whole than I had ever been. The words that upset me, he said softly, come from hearts that have forgotten they are loved. But the words that delight me come from hearts that remember. He looked toward the horizon, where the light of the garden now shimmered like dawn, breaking over creation itself. Jonathan, he said, tell them that I am not a distant king counting their failures. I am a father celebrating every step they take toward me. Tell them that every time they speak truth about who they are, they bring music to heaven. His eyes met mine again. Love is the language of heaven, he said. Teach them to speak it. The garden around us quieted, the radiance settling into a deep, peaceful glow. The air was filled with the scent of something indescribable, like rain meeting sunlight. I knew this was not the end of the vision, only the heart of it, the place where sorrow turned into revelation. And then he said something that would remain engraved in my soul forever. When my children truly know how loved they are, he whispered, they stop apologizing for being alive. They start thanking me for creating them. At that moment, the light around us flared into brilliance, and I felt the truth sink deeper than any sermon, any scripture I had ever known. It wasn't just about avoiding negative words. It was about living in alignment with divine truth, a truth that says you are loved beyond comprehension. The air trembled. His voice lingered like music that would never fade. Now, he said quietly, you understand why I weep and why I rejoice. The power of life and death is in the tongue, but so is the power of worship. And as he spoke, the garden itself began to sing. The air inside the garden shifted again. What had been calm and radiant moments earlier began to deepen into something almost unbearable in its intensity, as though love itself had turned into a language too vast for human hearts to contain. Jesus stood in the center of the garden, the light around him flickering like liquid gold. I sensed we were approaching the part of the revelation that would undo me completely. He looked at me with eyes that held the entire weight of creation, grief, and tenderness woven together. Jonathan, he said softly, there's something else you must see. The tone of his voice changed. It was no longer the teacher speaking, but the father whose children were in pain. He raised his hand toward the sky, and in an instant, the garden opened into a vision unlike anything I had ever seen. It was as though the walls of time had fallen away. Before me stretched millions upon millions of scenes. People everywhere, in bedrooms, offices, schools, hospitals, each of them speaking words they thought no one could hear. I saw a young woman sitting alone in the dark, whispering into her pillow, I'm not good enough. I'll never change. I saw a man staring at his reflection in a bathroom mirror, muttering, I hate who I am. I saw an elderly woman apologizing over and over for being a burden to her family. Each scene was intimate, heartbreakingly human. And with every word spoken, Jesus winced. It wasn't the recoil of anger. It was the ache of love. Pure, parental agony. He whispered, "Every one of those words I feel. They pierce me like thorns." The vision expanded further. I saw children, too young to understand theology, repeating words they'd heard from wounded adults. "I'm stupid. I'm ugly. God must be disappointed in me." Their innocence made the words all the more unbearable. "Do you see?" Jesus asked, his voice trembling. "They are not just hurting themselves. They are breaking my heart with every sentence because I know the truth about who they are, and they can't see it." His tears fell freely now, each drop shining like a star as it touched the garden floor. "They are speaking lies about my masterpieces," he said, "and each lie feels like a rejection of my love for them." I watched in silence, paralyzed by the enormity of it. The collective grief of heaven echoed through the vision like distant thunder. But then something changed. Amid all the pain, I began to notice flashes of light, tiny but radiant. A young mother, exhausted and afraid, whispered, "God still loves me." A man sitting alone in a hospital room breathed, "I am not forgotten." A teenager looked at her reflection and whispered through tears, "Maybe I'm still beautiful to him." And every time a person spoke truth instead of self-condemnation, light burst forth like sunrise. Jesus' face, moments ago twisted in grief, began to shine again. "This," he said through tears of joy, "this is what I live for." The garden around us blazed with color. Blues, greens, golds, so alive, they seemed to sing. "When my children speak truth about themselves," he said, "heaven rejoices. When they see themselves through my eyes, even for a moment, all of creation responds." He gestured toward the stream, and I saw ripples of light spreading outward, touching the world beyond the garden. Cities, families, churches. Every word of truth spoken in faith was a stone of light cast into eternity. I could barely stand under the beauty of it. "Lord," I whispered, "I've done it too. I've called myself unworthy. I've apologized for existing. I've treated your love like pity, not passion." My voice broke, and I fell to my knees. "I didn't know I was breaking your heart." Jesus knelt beside me. His hand rested on my shoulder with a tenderness that could only come from a love older than time itself. "Jonathan," he said, "you don't need to apologize. You only need to understand. Every time you have spoken against yourself, I've whispered truth over you. Every time you've doubted your worth, I've been there saying, 'You are mine.'" He lifted my chin until I met his gaze. His eyes were wet with tears but radiant with joy. "Now that you know, you can never speak the same way again." He stood and looked out toward the vast vision still unfolding around us. "The world has learned to speak death over itself," he said quietly. "Even my people have, but I am raising voices of truth, people who will speak life, who will call light out of darkness. You must be one of them." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "How, Lord? How do I help them see what I've seen?" "Start," he said, "by teaching them that their words are not small. Every phrase is a seed. Every confession is soil. Every declaration either grows weeds or gardens." His words struck me like thunder wrapped in silk. "Tell them that when they speak despair, they plant thorns. But when they speak gratitude, they plant roses. When they speak fear, they invite storms. But when they speak faith, they summon light." The vision before us began to shift again. I saw churches filled with people praying, some with hands lifted, others kneeling in silence. Jesus' expression softened. "Imagine," he said, "if every one of them spoke words that reflected my truth instead of their pain. Imagine a world where worship began not with 'I'm sorry,' but with 'Thank you.' where confession was not self-loathing, but trust. The very idea made the air shimmer. "Jonathan," he said, turning back to me, "do you understand now why I am not angry at my children for their words? I am heartbroken for them. They live in cages made of sentences they never questioned. Bars forged from every 'I can't', every 'I'm not enough', every 'God must be disappointed in me.' But I have already opened the door." He stretched out his hands, and I saw the scars. They glowed faintly, not with pain, but with the brilliance of redemption. "This," he said, "is the proof that they are free. But freedom must be accepted. It begins with new words." I felt the air pulse again as the vision dimmed. One by one, the scenes faded until only the garden remained. The light was gentler now, like the last glow before evening. Jesus walked a few steps ahead and then turned, smiling with warmth that dissolved every trace of fear. "I want you to remember something," he said. "This isn't about perfect speech or polished prayers. It's about hearts that know they're loved. When someone truly understands how precious they are to me, their words naturally change. They stop apologizing for existing. They start thanking me for choosing them." The simplicity of it hit me harder than any sermon I'd ever heard. He continued, "Love is the language of heaven. When my children learn to speak it, not just to others but to themselves, the sound of earth begins to resemble the sound of heaven." The garden grew brighter, as though the very atmosphere was responding to his truth. Then he placed both hands on my shoulders and looked straight into my soul. "This message," he said, "will set people free. When they understand how their words affect my heart, they will begin to speak differently, not out of fear, but out of love." He smiled again, and the smile felt like sunrise after a lifetime of winter. "Remember this," he said gently. "The goal is not control, it's communion. I don't want eloquence. I want honesty that's born from love." I could feel the garden shifting once more, fading around the edges, as if reality itself was preparing to bring me back. Jesus' voice grew softer, yet stronger than ever. "Tell them I am not disappointed," he said. "Tell them I am not keeping score. Tell them my heart isn't wounded by rebellion, but by forgetting. Tell them their words matter to me because they matter to me." I tried to hold on to the light, to the sound, to the feeling, but the vision began to dissolve, colors bleeding into white. "Jonathan," his voice whispered one last time, echoing as if across galaxies, "remember, I am not upset with them. I am heartbroken for them. Always lead with love." And then, just like that, the garden was gone. When the light faded and I opened my eyes again, I was back in my room. The world was quiet. No angelic chorus, no glowing horizon, only the soft hum of the night outside and the faint rhythm of my own heartbeat. Yet everything had changed. The air itself felt different, lighter, alive with a holiness that words could never quite contain. I sat there for a long time, tears streaming down my face, realizing that what I had just experienced was not a dream. It was a revelation, one that would reshape how I spoke, how I prayed, and how I lived for the rest of my days. I could still hear his final words echoing in my heart. "Your words matter to me, Jonathan, every single one." I remember whispering back into the stillness, "I'll never forget." That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the first light of morning spread through my window, painting the floor in gold, and I thought about every conversation I'd ever had with God. How often I had begun with apology instead of gratitude. How easily I had said things about myself that heaven could never agree with. It was as if my entire vocabulary had been cleansed in his presence. And now I was being asked to rebuild it, word by word, truth by truth. In the days that followed, I began to notice how often I caught myself before speaking. Phrases that used to slip out unconsciously now stopped me mid-sentence. When I'd start to say, "I'm not enough," I'd hear his voice whisper, "You're mine." When I wanted to say, "I probably don't deserve this," I'd feel the echo of his hand on my shoulder and remember, "You are chosen." It wasn't easy at first. The old patterns of language had deep roots. They had grown through years of self-criticism disguised as humility. But every time I replaced those words with the truth, I felt something inside me shift, like a door opening a little wider, letting light flood into rooms I hadn't entered in years. One afternoon on set, I caught myself apologizing out of habit. We were filming a particularly emotional scene, and after several takes I sighed. "Sorry, I'm probably slowing everyone down." The assistant director looked at me and said, "You don't need to apologize. You're doing great." In that moment, I smiled because I heard the deeper voice behind those words. It was as if Jesus himself was reminding me, "Stop apologizing for existing." Since that encounter, my prayers have changed completely. I no longer begin with self-condemnation. I begin with thankfulness. Thank you for wanting to spend time with me. Thank you for calling me yours. Thank you for loving me, even when I forget how to love myself. And what's extraordinary is how that small shift has changed my relationship with him. Prayer no longer feels like approaching a throne of judgment. It feels like coming home to a father who's been waiting at the door the whole time. I realized, too, that this wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. Every believer, every soul carrying the quiet habit of speaking against themselves, every child of God who whispers, "I'm sorry," when heaven is waiting to hear, "Thank you." We have been speaking a language of exile in the presence of a God who has already invited us home. So I began to pray differently, not only for myself, but for everyone who would hear this story. "Lord," I prayed, "teach us to speak heaven's language again." And then came the moment that changed me forever. While praying, I felt his presence again, gentle, unmistakable. He didn't appear visibly this time, but his voice was as clear as if he stood beside me. "Jonathan," he said, "you understand now. You've seen my heart, but don't keep this to yourself. Tell them I am not angry at them for the words they've spoken in pain. I am heartbroken for them. My correction is not punishment. It is an invitation to healing." I sat completely still, overwhelmed by his mercy. "How should I tell them, Lord?" I whispered. "Tell them," he said, "that their words are mirrors. What they speak, they start to believe. And what they believe, they start to live. If they speak from wounds, they live wounded. But if they speak from love, they live free." Those words struck something deep within me. I understood then that this revelation was not a private comfort. It was a calling. It was meant to ripple outward, to awaken a generation that had forgotten the sound of heaven's language. And so I share this with you now, not as a preacher or actor, but as a brother who has seen how language can either bind or liberate the soul. If you have spoken words that you know would grieve his heart, if you've ever called yourself unworthy or whispered that you're too broken to be loved, please hear me. He is not angry with you. He is aching for you to see what he sees. You are his masterpiece, his reflection, his joy. The blood he shed was not a transaction. It was a declaration. You are worth everything. I remember something else he said in that garden, a line that returns to me every day. "The words that upset me most come from hearts that don't know they are loved. But when my children finally understand my love, Their words change on their own. That's when I understood. This entire revelation was never about controlling speech. It was about awakening love. Since then, I've started asking myself one simple question before I speak. Whether in prayer, in conversation, or even in thought, will this word bring joy or sorrow to God's heart? It's remarkable how that question changes everything. Words become sacred again. Conversations become worship. Even silence feels full of meaning when it's born from awareness of His presence. And when I speak now, whether on camera or in prayer, I try to echo the language of truth that I heard in that garden. I am loved. I am chosen. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am forgiven. I am His. These aren't affirmations, they're agreements with heaven. And so, as I close this story, I want to invite you into that same transformation. Take a deep breath right now and whisper this. God, thank you for wanting to be with me. Feel the weight of that truth. The Creator of the universe delights in hearing your voice. He's not weary of your prayers. He's waiting for them. Let your next words to Him be words of gratitude, not guilt. Let them sound like music to heaven's ears. I know some of you may be carrying years of negative speech, habits formed from pain, shame, or fear. But remember this. Transformation doesn't start with perfection. It starts with love. Let me pray for you. Father, for every person hearing these words, let the truth of your love silence the lies they've believed. Where there was self-hatred, let there be compassion. Where there was shame, let there be gratitude. Replace every "I'm not enough" with "I am yours." Replace every "I'm a failure" with "I am redeemed." Teach us to speak words that make heaven rejoice. Words that honor your sacrifice. Words that reflect your heart. Help us remember that when we speak with love, we are not just talking, we are worshipping. Let our tongues become instruments of healing. Let our prayers become echoes of your joy. Let our words carry the fragrance of heaven into every corner of earth. In Jesus' name, Amen. And if this message has reached you, if something in your heart stirred while you listened, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let it remind someone else that God's heart isn't hardened toward them. It's breaking for them, longing to be believed again. Every word you speak has the power to either wound or heal the one who made you. Choose healing. Choose truth. Choose love. Because when heaven listens, and it always does, your words don't just disappear into the air. They rise like incense, and somewhere, in a garden brighter than dawn, Jesus smiles.